Okay. Today we will continue for the ISO 27001 foundation course. And as we discussed yesterday, that the ISO 27001 consists of two components. The clauses, which are the requirements which the organization should comply with to achieve the ISO certification, and the annex. This annex, which is called Annex A, it contains 114 controls, and they are distributed between administrative, physical, and managerial, technical. These are the controls which it can be used as a guide for you when you can implement the ISO 27001 in your organization. And we mentioned yesterday that the ISO process, it is a continuous process, and it follows the concept of the BDCA, or the demon cycle. And we split yesterday the clauses of the ISO over the demon cycle. And today we will start with the planning. Planning, it consists of 4 clauses. Clause number 4, organization context. Clause number 5, leadership and commitment. Clause number 6, planning. And finally, clause number 7 for support. Okay. Let's start with the clause number 4. As you remember, we mentioned that in these clauses, we have sub-clauses. Organization context is a clause number 4. We have 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4. We have 4 sub-clauses in the clause 4, which is organization context. Organization context concentrate mainly on the business, and it requires to understand the organization context. What are the factors which are affecting the organization internally and externally? What are the interested parties and their expectations and requirements? What is the information security management system scope? And what is the information security management system definition in your company? Organization context, it's very important step to perform to implement the ISO, because it helps in understand the organization activities, goals, objectives, processes, products, services, and all this information, it will lead to define the assets of the company and their criticality for performing the organization's objective or objectives. To find the criticality of assets, it's very important, because as we mentioned yesterday, it's very important to understand the criticality of the assets. Then you will be able to utilize the proper resources for these assets which are critical for the operation, then to avoid wasting of resources, or to utilize resources for some assets which are not critical for the business. Point number 1 for the understanding organization internal and external context. To make it easy, internal context, it is anything internally inside the organization which it will affect the implementation of the ISO or protecting the assets. And the external, it will be whatever any external issues or factors which can affect the organization context and the implementation of the ISO as well. You will find here in the internal context, organization mission, goals, objectives, strategies, knowledge, structure, values, culture, infrastructure, resources. I think we understood the objective of understanding mission, goals, objective, and strategies, and what is the type of organization knowledge do we have. But here, gentlemen, what do you think? Why do we need to understand the organization structure? Is it mandatory to understand the structure of the company or of the organization to implement the ISO? And if it's yes, why? Why do we want to understand it? Besides the values of the organization and the culture. Yani, my question, why do we want to understand the organization structure, values, culture, how these values or how this information will help us in the ISO 27001 implementation? Any answer?
To understand the value of the assets that we need to, for which we need to create the management ISMS basically.
Okay. But this, how the company structure or organization structure, it will affect the assets.
Abu, can I talk?
Sure.
Yeah, I think all of this information, it will play a role into the directions, creating the policies, applying the standards. So I think understanding this information, it will be a role and it will be a factor in doing this.
Okay. Look here, gentlemen, it's very important to understand that first thing what we are looking for is the assets. And we mentioned that why do we want to understand the assets? We want to understand the assets and its criticality, then we will be able to apply risk assessments for these assets, then we will be able to develop the appropriate risk response. Now, if what is the organization structure it will affect in the ISO implementation? Organization structure is very important to define the scope, this number one, the scope of the ISO implementation. Besides, do you remember when I told you that the Chief Security Officer, CSO, he should be reported into what? CEO or CIO? What do you think? The security manager, he should be reported to the IT manager or the CEO of the company? Any answer?
It doesn't depend on the size or the type of the organization?
No.
I think it should be to the CEO, but I am not sure why exactly.
I think it's CEO.
Right.
I agree with Wael. It's CEO.
Right. It must be to the CEO. Why? Because if the security, it should be independent and it should be reported to the top management. Because the security, if I want to protect the information assets and the IT, then I should not be under the umbrella of the IT.
Yes.
I should be reported to the top management. Besides, if I'm under the IT, then the security rule, it will be an operation rather than proactive approach. So it's highly recommended that the CSO to be as reported to the CEO. And by the way, this is the regulation required by NCA right now. Now in Saudi Arabia, we make this as regulation that the CSO, he should be reported into the top management, not to the IT. When a lot of organizations, we start to split the security from IT if we were one department before. Another value which I want you to think about it, organization culture. What is the definition of culture? What is the definition of culture?
Knowing how, based on the environment.
What do you mean?
It's called, I'm trying to get the right name for that. I understand it, but I'm not able to express it.
Okay. The culture, it's the attitude of the persons regarding the right and wrong, which is not controlled by laws and regulation. For example, in some organizations, we are saying our culture prevents you to receive any gifts from the vendors. To receive a gift, it's not forbidden in law, no problem, it's acceptable. But as a culture, no, it's not allowed, it's forbidden. In the culture, you will find that it is in any organization, it concerns on 3 different things, especially in risk assessment discussion. Number 1, the behavior regarding the negative outcome. What do you mean by behavior related to negative outcome? Suppose that you have a project and you failed. In some organization, if you failed, you will find that you may be terminated, you maybe have a note in your file, and you may be in a big trouble. And this is a problem because we understand that I may fail, and this is not the end of the world. When I have to understand what was my problem, I have to correct the problem and make a learned lesson and start again. But in the blaming culture, people always blame each one or each others for mistakes. And this, it will lead to avoid any new opportunities. Because if I have any opportunity, I may fail, then this, it will be a blame and I will be in a trouble. Then this means that I have to avoid any new opportunities. And this, it will affect the information or the security in general. Why? Because in the blaming environment, do you think that the risk appetite, it will be high or low?
Hi, Abu Yahya.
Risk appetite is low. Because here I don't accept risks. I want everything to go systematic without any risk. When my risk appetite is low.
Abu Yahya, you are talking about the blaming organization?
Yes. In the blaming organization, I don't want to have any opportunity, or I don't want to have any problem, then I will avoid any problem, then I want to avoid any risk. When I am not ready to take any risk, when my risk appetite is low. My risk appetite here is low. When the culture of the organization, it affects my risk appetite. And you will see later in the risk management courses that the risk appetite and risk tolerance, they are very important factors which control the risk assessment, which is considered as a backbone of the ISO 27001 implementation. When the culture here, it affects the ISO implementation. Besides, in organization values, what are my value or values? What are my values which I'm looking for? In the companies which we have an ethic values, you will find that they are protected and we are professional and we have a good reputation in the market. And due to this reputation, good reputation in the market, their risk appetite, it may be high or low. It depends. Why? It depends upon the management. Because if they are caring about their reputation, then okay, we want to avoid risks. Risk appetite is low. But in some organizations, we are saying, okay, we have a good reputation and we want to utilize this reputation. How we can utilize this reputation? We can utilize this reputation by taking more opportunities. Can you give me an example of a risk opportunity? It's a risk, but still it's a positive output. It's an opportunity. Can you give me an example of a risk opportunity?
Like a new solution, if we apply it, we will gain a certain value over here. The value here, it will be the positive. However, the new solution, it is a risk.
I think this, what you are call it, it's residual risk. It's not an opportunity. It's a residual risk. Because whatever any process you will implement or project or system, new project or system, it will have a residual risk. And the risk management function or main objective, it's minimizing the residual risks to the accepted level of the risk appetite. When in this case, is not opportunity. It may be a business requirements to have the system or whatever, and by the end of the day, it has a residual risk, and we will try to minimize this risk. One of the examples here that, for example, suppose that I am working with a vendor, and this vendor, it's a big organization, enterprise organization, and they are provide me with the components which I required for my productivity. Everything is running fine. But in the market, there is a new company. It's a small company, but if I buy from this company, my profit, it will increase into 15% or 20%. This means that if I am buying the components for $1 million per year, from the other company, I will buy it only for maybe $750,000. Here, this is an opportunity. Why? Because the opportunity here that I will maximize my profit. But what is the risk? The risk that this new company, it may not be able to provide the components to me on time, and this, it can affect my productivity and my reputation in the market. When there are positive and negative at the same time, there is an opportunity, but it's risky. It's risky, but still an opportunity. If this company, it was able to provide the components on time, then I'm in a good shape and I have a good reputation in the market, and my productivity, it will not be affected. plus I will improve my profit by whatever the percentage which I will make. Okay. Then, as we discussed here, the organization missions, goals, structure, values, culture, these are the points when you will understand it, you will be able to understand the organization and you will be able to get the important information and factors which it will affect the ISO implementation in your organization. In IT infrastructure, of course, there is no need to highlight this point because I am quite sure that you are familiar with it. But it depends upon all the information and ISMS, I mean, it depends upon the IT infrastructure, and if the IT infrastructure is able to provide the service on high availability, confidentiality, and integrity, then this means that we are in good shape, and my network is stable, and my service, it will be as stable as well. Okay, this is the internal context. What about the external context? In the external context, we mentioned that these are the external factors which are affecting the organization. Like what? For example, new regulations, as in Saudi Arabia when we had the NCA. This NCA, within one day or one night, we found that there is a new regulation called the NCA. We have to work with NCA and we have to apply it in our organization, and this it will require a lot of operations and it will affect our ISO implementation. Why? Because NCA mandates some requirements which you have to take it in your consideration. Then if you are complying with it, that's fine. If it's not, then you have to take some steps to implement the requirements. In some situation, political environment. And for example, now you know that in America, whenever any Chinese product in communication is not allowed. Imagine that you are an organization working in telecommunication and you are depending upon Huawei, for example, telecommunication devices, and suddenly the government took a decision that it's not allowed to use any Chinese devices or the Chinese telecommunication devices. This again, it will affect your ISO because this affects your stability and availability. You have to work very close with your partners to find out a replacement. The culture environment. Culture is very important, gentlemen. Let me tell you a scenario from my practical experience. You know, I was working as IT manager for one of Saudi Arabia universities. You know what are the information which it was classified as top secure in our database? What do you think? What are the data which it was classified as top secure in our database?
Maybe the result of the exams.
You know, this is the second time to ask this question, and this is the second time to get the same answer. And again, this is the second time to reply, no, it was not. The results of the exam, it was class B, not class A. What do you think? It depends on the culture environment. Any idea?
Nationalities and religions of the staff and the students.
By the end of the day, all of us are Muslims. يعني تقريبا يعني in the university, all of them are Muslims.
It was in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Okay, you know, gentlemen, what it was? It was the phone numbers, names, address, and personal information of the female students and the teaching staff. Just imagine your daughter or your wife or your relative, it's provide her information, mobile, WhatsApp, whatever, any information to the university. And of course, you are believing that this data, it should be secure. Just imagine what will happen if this data it's leaked and it will go to the wrong hand, which it can utilize it, especially for the students. Then here the culture, it makes a big difference in our implementation for the ISO 27001. The culture, it makes many difference. Yeah, for example, if I'm in Egypt, for example, I don't care at all about the phone numbers and all this stuff. Okay, I will consider it as BII, personal identification information, to protect it. That's fine. Although this, it will not make any difference in the Egypt, because there are no laws or regulations which mandate this. Anyway, if we are professional, we will consider that this is important and we have to protect. But I will never care about this is information for male or female. This is not my attitude at all in Egypt. But in Saudi Arabia, no. This is very important and I have to take it in my consideration and think about it very carefully. Okay? These are some of the examples of the internal and external factor or context which can be affected the organization. The point number 2, subclause number 2, understanding needs and expectations of interested parties. I think we discussed this point yesterday, and we mentioned that the interested parties, which we call it in other certification bodies as stakeholders, and these are the people who are affected by the ISO implementation. They can be internal or can be external, and it can be employees, can be customers, it can be partners, vendors, suppliers, local authorities, board of directors, just to name it. And this is very important to understand what is the expectation of each one of them. Then you can have a buy-in from their side, and you can have a positive attitude from their side as a project management techniques. Besides, you can understand what are the requirements from the ISMS and their expectation, then you will be able to properly implement and design the ISMS in proper way according and based on the customers or interested parties requirements. Yani, for example, now, if I'm in Saudi Arabia, I have to take in my consideration the NCA. NCA, it's in your regulation. I have to think about it. It's very important. I have to take it in my consideration. I have to take the documents, read it, understand it, and check if these requirements are implemented or not. If it's not, then this means that I have to make an action plan then to implement the requirements, and this action plan I have to take it in proper steps by budgeting and implementation of controls, monitor it, and so on, to make sure that these controls are effective. Also, from point of view of government, it can be an interested party. Why? Because it can be affected. Why? Because the government, it may have some regulations. How? GDPR, for example, you have to protect BII, personal identification information. Then again, these are requirements which you have to take it in your consideration while you are designing the requirements of the ISMS. Then these are the requirements and the expectations of the interested parties, which you have to take it in your consideration and understand it very well. Okay, any questions? طيب في حد صاحي؟
بس Abu Yahya, one question here. In the topic it's saying understanding. That means it's not required to be written as a document. I'm right?
No, it is not. لا, it is not. Expectation دي لا.
Okay. But it preferred maybe to be written.
أكيد. Sure. Whatever any document يعني you will find in the ISO but not in this course later. It is not required, but it's preferred for the following reasons.
Okay, but for the audit,
لا,
let's say
for
for
the audit,
auditing.
tomorrow inshallah you will have in Appendix A the documents which are mandatory. We will have a slide for the documents which are mandatory. This we will discuss it tomorrow.
Okay.
But I think this is a way, it depends on the ISO type, right?
ISO,
for example, for the ISO 9001, the organization chart and all the organization information, it is mandatory to be known, right?
Yes, it depends upon what type of ISO do you implement. In ISO 27001, it's security. It's not mandatory to have the organization.
At the end, they are ISO, right?
Yeah, but we have different objectives. ISO, it's a company. يعني the same as you are saying Microsoft Office. What is the relation between PowerPoint and Word? Both of them are Office. But each one of them, it has its own objective.
So it means that it doesn't require to, for a certain ISO, it is a mandatory there, it shouldn't be ISO on the other one.
No, it is not, no. Okay. The subclause 4.3, how to define the scope of information management system. And this scope, you have to define what is the mission which you want to achieve. You have to take in your consideration the results of the risk assessment, the analysis of interested parties and their requirements. What are the activities which are operated by different companies as outsourcing? And this is very important here, gentlemen, that ISO 27001 mandates that the ISMS scope must be documented. Must be documented. And this scope, it have to define a list of the services, products, areas, locations, whatever, where is the location, or I mean the scope where it should be covered by this implementation. This is very important because as we will see later in clause number 6, the scope, it will be very important to define what is the ISMS objectives. Because if I want to define the ISMS objective, I have to define the scope first. What is the area which I have to concentrate on? This is my area which I have to concentrate on. Great, then the objective it shall be 1, 2, 3, 4, as we would see later. Okay? Any questions?